Okay. Om Agyanatimiranda Syangarangana Sarakya Chaksurun Militam Yana Tajmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yana Bhutare Swayam Rupa Karamayam Dadati Swapanantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamanam Sri Guru Vaishnavam Sa Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sajevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivisikan Vitam Stam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Sarasati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesa Sunyavadi Praskita De Satarine. Thanks to everyone for joining us on this Wisdom Wednesday. We're going to do something that we haven't done before. This will be our first interview on Wisdom Wednesday. May not be our last, but we couldn't resist the opportunity to interview Sankirtan Das, otherwise known in professional storytelling circles as Andy Frankel. And to start the show off, we threw up a picture of, maybe Sankirtan, you can tell us about this picture. Today's a very special, aside from it being Wisdom Wednesday in Utah, it is a very intimate and personal landmark day for you. Could you tell us about it?
Well, this is a picture of my wife and I. We met in college in the around 1968, and this is in 1971, the day we were married, or maybe around that time. We were married today. This is our 50th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations, everybody who's with us. A hearty, Hari Bol, the big 5-0.
Interestingly enough, we started chanting on our prayer beads around this same time. And we're still trying to figure out if we started chanting before or after our wedding. And so we attribute the success of our 50 years together because we started chanting at the same time around that particular time of our wedding in 1971.
You tell us that along with the long hair and the beard, you're wearing a jacket, a coat, and a tie as well. It's probably the only time you wore such apparel, right?
I wore a tie and overalls.
Overalls and a tie.
And when we went down to City Hall in New York City, they looked at me and they said, "You can't wear overalls to your wedding." And I had been there several days earlier. We were getting the marriage certificate, and it said on the door that tie and a jacket are required for the men. And so I said, there's the tie and the jacket. I got the tie, I got the jacket, and I'm wearing my overalls. And the guy was very skeptical. And then I also told him that I was a poet. And then he said, "Oh, in that case, all right, we'll continue."
This is in New York. Weren't they used to all kinds of different varieties of people in New York City?
Not in 1960, not in 71.
And let me tell you, I think you actually look not any older, if not younger, than you do in this picture. Isn't that amazing? Good living, huh?
Mm. Yes, I guess.
Okay, let's go back here now to our full screen. So just a little bit more. Let me tell you also that between you and I, your wife, whose name is what?
Ruchi.
Ruchi, and my wife and I by Bobby, we have 100 years of marriage between us.
Oh, okay.
Our 50th wedding anniversary is coming up on May 17th.
Oh, fantastic.
And we knew each other about a year and a half before we actually got married. So
Beautiful.
got a century of married life between us. We recently got a case of your book, a abridged version of the Mahabharat. You know, first time I read the Mahabharata was present in Sydney Temple in 1971, and I had a very bad stress on my voice because of having. And I used to give Bhagavatam class for an hour a day, 7 days a week, and then do all the talking that comes with being a temple president. So I was in danger of having permanent nodes on my throat. I went to a speech therapist, said you can't speak for 6 weeks. And so the way I accomplished that was I took the bus to the Sydney Library. I think it was called the Wilson Library. I found an unabridged copy of the Mahabharat by Ganguly, which is 12 volumes long, small print, 600 pages. And I would arrive at the library at 9 in the morning and read till 3 in the afternoon, take the bus back to the temple. It took me 6 weeks to read the Mahabharata. But you've come out with a very, just hitting the highlights, very digestible version of Mahabharata. I'd like to know about that publication. I'd like to know about your lifelong love affair with drama in general and the Mahabharata in specific.
Well, I encountered the Mahabharata actually in college. This is like in 1968 or 69. I had briefly encountered the Devotees. I lived in the Lower East Side in New York City, not far from 26 Second Avenue. So I knew about the Devotees. And then I encountered.
Sorry.
I,
Sorry.
I encountered this book in the library, in the college library, and I didn't really think that they're both from India, but I didn't really make a connection between the Mahabharata and the Hare Krishna people. And so I found this fascinating story about Yudhisthira and the dog. And I used it in at that time I was majoring in theater and filmmaking. And so for my theater project, actually we were developing a series of short pieces to take out to the local public schools. We performed 4 short dramatic pieces, and this story that I developed with Yudhisthira and the dog was one of those 4 pieces that we took to the local elementary schools at the time.
Now you're a storyteller, and here's a story that you're alluding to. So can you give us a quick synopsis of the story and why it was so fascinating to you?
Well, at the end of their reign, their rule in Indraprastha, the Pandavas, they were kind of getting ready to retire. Yudhisthira, being the eldest, he was the first one. He gave up the royal crown, put aside the royal scepter. He started wandering around the palace as one who is deaf and dumb. He divorced himself from any mundane activities. And so his brothers, his 4 brothers, and also their common queen Draupadi, they were watching Yudhisthira very carefully. And one night, Yudhisthira just left the palace for good. And the 4 brothers, they were following close behind. And even Draupadi, she followed them into the dead of night. And they were also followed by a dog. And as they wandered higher and higher, they went north to the Himalayan mountains. And the Himalayas, of course, they're bitter cold. And Draupadi was the first one to leave this mortal world. And one by one, each of the brothers, they departed from this world. And at the end, there was only Yudhisthira, but he wasn't alone. He was still followed by that dog. And Yudhisthira and the dog, they became the best of friends. And as they wandered the Himalayan heights, one day, Yudhisthira beheld this magnificent chariot circling the mountains. And it was coming closer and closer, and the chariot descended right before Yudhisthira, but it didn't touch the ground. On the chariot was Indra, the king of the heavens. And Indra said, "Come, get onto my chariot. I'll take you to the heavens." And Yudhisthira, he declined. He said, "I don't want to go anywhere without my brothers, without my queen Draupadi." And Indra said, "Well, what are you waiting for? They've already arrived in heaven and they're waiting for you at this very moment." And so Yudhisthira, he was overwhelmed, and he was getting onto the chariot, and he was being followed by the dog. And Indra threw up his hands. "Wait! What is this dog? Get away! There's no place in heavens for a lowly dog." And when Yudhisthira heard that, he got off the chariot. And King Indra was saying, Yudhisthira, what's going on? What if you can't take this dog? I'm not going either. And Indra was saying, you are prepared to give up the riches and comforts of heaven for a dog? Yudhisthira says, yes, this dog is my friend, and to abandon a friend is infinitely sinful. I will not go. And just at that moment, it was all a test, because that dog was not an ordinary dog. It was actually Yudhisthira's celestial father, Dharmaraj. And Dharmaraj revealed himself, who he was, a dog in disguise. And so Dharmaraj says, I've come here to test you, to test your forbearance, to test your wisdom, to test your compassion. And my son, you have pleased me very much. All blessings upon you. And then they both got onto the chariot, and Indra flicked the reins, and the chariot ascended into the heavens. So I took this story and put it into a script, and we used it as one, like I said, as one of the 4 performances. We did 4 short plays in the course of an hour for the elementary school kids.
What school was this you were attending?
City College in New York.
So we've got some extroverts that come on here, and we've got some people who are literally accomplished, like Britta. We've got Anjali. We've got Jayashree, Radhe. Natasha's brand new. She's just getting her feet wet in the culture. She might need a little bit more of an overview of the Mahabharat itself. So I want to ask you, again, can you tell someone who's not that familiar with the Mahabharat about its antique significance? And then can you also, I'm very curious, because you're obviously a very accomplished storyteller, after 50 years of being a raconteur, of telling stories in a dramatic, impressive way, I want you, after telling us about the Mahabharat in general and its place in the antique world, can you tell us what you've learned? Can you share with any of us who aspire to be verbal and dramatic communicators what tips you can pass on to us? 2 questions there.
Okay, so let me just go back to the first one. You'll have to remind me of the second one.
I will.
But actually, the Mahabharat, I've been on this lifelong journey with the Mahabharat. Later on, I performed with the Vaikuntha players, Lokamangala and Nandakishore in New York City for a while. And then Lokamangala joined me in New Vrindavan in the early 80s. And we took one chapter of the Mahabharata. It's also in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Pandavas retire timely. And so the Mahabharata, of course, is the story of Yudhisthira and his 4 brothers, and the adventures and the trials and the tribulations they had to go through.
What is the date? What date is it?
It's like in 1980.
No, the instances of the Mahabharat.
The instances? I'm not sure.
How many years ago did these?
Oh, the date of the Mahabharat.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically it's 5,000 years ago. The Mahabharat, there's astrological references in the Mahabharat when particular events took place. And according to these astrological references, then it could be determined when these events actually took place 5,000 years ago. And it was right on the cusp of the Kali Yuga. And so in 1980, though, Lokamangala and I developed this 2-man piece. It was just one scene of the Pandavas retire timely, where Arjuna returns from Dwarka, and Yudhisthira is anxiously waiting for Arjuna's return because he heard that there were some strange things happening in Dwarka. And Arjuna, he goes to investigate. And after some months' time, he returns. And Yudhisthira, in the meantime, has been noticing these very strange omens. in his kingdom. Even the deities, they seem that they want to leave the temple. And the dogs are barking at him. And in the marketplaces, there's strange symptoms. People are getting angry with each other on the slightest provocation. People are beginning to cheat one another. And Yudhishthira is very concerned about these things. And so when Arjuna returns, then he tells him the horrific news that Krishna has left the planet. And not only that, is that Dwarka has been destroyed. And so we do this scene. Before there was a drama competition. Some Indian professors at the Columbia College in New York City decided to put together a Indian drama competition. And so we entered that competition, and out of like 7 or 8 entries, we took first place.
Jai, Haribo.
That was in 1980 or 81. And then years later, actually, when I went to India, I met a saintly personality, an elderly gentleman in Vrindavan, and we spoke about the Mahabharat. And he told me, he looked at me and he said, you know, once you let the Mahabharat into your heart, it will never leave you. And I have to say, like I've been on this lifelong journey with the Mahabharat. And so in 1987, or it was in 86, I had read about Peter Brook. He developed this 9-hour Mahabharat production. Peter Brook is a very famous British director, and he had an international cast that he developed, and he was taking it all over the world. And he was coming to New York City in the fall of 1987. And so this was in January of 1987. And so Lokamangala and I decided that when Peter Brook is going to be in New York City, he's doing a 3-month run in New York in the fall of 1987. We're going to develop our Mahabharat on a fuller, broader sense. We have one scene that we've done, but now we're going to present a fuller picture of the Mahabharat and take it to New York, rent a theater in downtown, in Midtown Manhattan. It was the Off-Broadway Theater, American Theater of Actors. And so we decided to perform at the same time Peter Brook was performing, to kind of get in on the momentum that he's a famous director, and his production surely was going to create waves in New York City. So anyways, we were looking around for other people to join us. We had written a script that encompassed like 12 or 14 scenes, but no one wanted to make that commitment. You know, we were rehearsing for several months. We rented a theater for 6 weeks, and then we were going to schedule the Mahabharat at colleges and temples, etc., etc. So it was a long-term commitment. No one wanted to make such a commitment. And so we figured out how to do the entire Mahabharat that our script, just the two of us. So we performed a 2-man Mahabharat. And Loka, he played Krishna, he played the blind king Dhritarashtra, and a slew of other, Yudhishthira he played, and I played Arjuna and Vidura, and one other bad character, Duryodhan.
We had your version. We had that in BYU around that time. I know Lokamangala came, Halayuda came. It was a 3-man presentation. And you told me before we went on the air today that you weren't there. And I had assumed that you would have been the third person. And if you weren't there, I can't imagine who it was. But we were sponsored by a professor in the religion department of BYU who made available the large auditorium right there in the student center, the Wilkinson Student Center, It was filled. 500 students showed up,
Fantastic.
and it was a three-man production. I could have sworn you were one of those three, but I
No,
guess not.
unfortunately, I've never been to Utah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I don't know who it was.
Okay,
But a lot of brilliant production, brilliant production. Obviously, a lot of costume changes. And the interesting thing was, we were having a festival around there, and we had the Rangana Ketan dancers from Manipur in Utah at the time. So after the three-man presentation to the Mahabharat, which the students loved, then the Manipur dancers came on, and they did an interpretive scene of the Mahabharat with two swordsmen just wailing away at each other, full speed, full energy. Sparks were just showering all over the thing. They told us later that if you made one slip, it could have been fatal for either one of those. So they did this whole impression of the Mahabharat War. And then after the Mahabharat War was finished and the villains were all killed and the Pandavas were restored to the throne, then they had the Rasa dance. And the beautiful, sublime Manipuri Rasa dance with the costume and the music and all.
sounds
It,
fantastic.
it was a lifelong memory for me. Apparently, you weren't there, but we owe that script and the choreography and everything to you and Lokamangala. So you were here in spirit if you weren't here physically.
No, Loka and I performed together starting in 19. Well, we performed for many years, but we started the Mahabharat in the fall of 1987, and we performed for 3 years together, touring with the Mahabharat to colleges and temples and festivals. And then he left for California. And I think that your event happened probably at that time when he left and he went to move to the LA temple in California.
Yeah, Halayuda from California also was one of those three people that performed. So just for Natasha, I just want to mention one more thing. Mahabharat. Bharat is a name for India even today. The Hindi word for India is Bharat, named after a great king of antique times named Bharat. And Maha it's the story of greater India. Before India was cut up into India and Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, India's been being cut up for 5,000 years. But if you go back to 5,000 years ago, India there was a worldwide culture called Sanatan Dharma, or the Vedic culture, which extended even to England, even to China, to all parts of South and Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Europe. And all the kings in the known world at that time paid tribute to whoever was sitting on the throne in Hastinapur, which was approximately where modern-day Delhi is today. And so what it is, it's the history of India in its glory, in its prime, and most of the incidents took place 5,000 years ago. There are many illusions. The Pandavas spend 13 years in exile in the forest. They sit around the campfires of great saints and sages who tell them stories from tens and thousands of years prior, but the actual plot and narrative of the Mahabharata takes place 5,000 years ago. And whoever won the Kurukshetra war would sit on the throne in Hastinapur and basically rule the world, at least in the sense that all other rulers as far away as Europe and China would acknowledge the leader in Delhi and pay tribute to him. So that's the literal meaning of the word Mahabharata. Now, we have two epics in the Western countries, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The protagonist in the Iliad is Achilles. The protagonist in the Odyssey is Odysseus. And India also has two epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Can you tell us something about what's the difference, mainly with regard to the protagonists in these epics?
Well, the thing is about you mentioned the Kurukshetra war, and that took place between the two rivals for the kingdom of Hastinapura. And that was the five brothers were on one side, the Pandavas, and then the Kauravas, their rivals, were on the opposing side. And of course, this is where the Bhagavad Gita takes place, that Arjuna, right before the war is about to begin, Arjuna is telling Krishna, Krishna is his chariot driver. And he's telling Krishna, I don't want to have to win a kingdom at the expense of killing my friends and relatives, and even my teachers are standing, they're opposed on the other side. I'd rather, and he threw down his Gandiva bow. He was despondent. He was calling it quits, going back to the forest. And so Krishna said, well, wait a minute. you can't do that. And so the entire Bhagavad Gita is spoken right before the battle. And so the rivals are the 5 brothers, the Pandavas, and on the other side is the leading opponent is Duryodhan and his 99 brothers. They're cousins of the Pandavas, and they both claim the throne. But the Pandavas are so kind-hearted that they're ready to walk away. And Krishna has even told Duryodhan prior to the battle that, the Pandavas don't want a great kingdom. They're 5 brothers. They'll be happy with 5 villages. Just give them 5 villages to rule, and you can avoid the war. And Duryodhan jumps up from his throne and he says, I'm not going to give the Pandavas even enough land to stick a pin into. I'm not even going to give them that much. And so Duryodhan, he because of his greed, he was the ruination of his dynasty. And so the Mahabharata has a very important lesson to share with us. And as far as the Iliad and Odyssey, these are Greek stories, but now they're part of world classics. And so the same way, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, they may be Hindu stories, but they're also part of world classics. And whenever I go to a college, I try to make that point, that these literatures are not meant just for people in India, but these literatures are meant for the residents of the world. And Prabhupada, in his Srimad Bhagavatam, the first canto, he explains on the pages of the book that the Mahabharata, in this age of Kali, the Mahabharata is more important than the original Vedas for understanding what our purpose is, what are the dilemmas of life, how to solve the dilemmas of life. Everything that is there explained in the Mahabharata.
So by reading the Mahabharata, one would, so to speak, imbibe all the deep philosophical and theological truths of the Vedas themselves?
Yes, it's all there. Basically, I always say that the Bhagavad Gita is like, there's these books called dummy series.
Cliff Notes also.
For dummies, gardening for dummies. So the Mahabharata is the Vedas for dummies. And the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains the entire essence of all Vedic knowledge is right there in Bhagavad Gita. And so Arjuna, he's put in this conundrum. And so he turns for spiritual guidance. And so very often in our own lives, we're too busy enjoying the material world. And if we have some dilemma that comes up in our own lives, then it's an opportunity to approach spiritual knowledge, just like Arjuna did when he was facing this huge dilemma. He approached Krishna.
Now, we have Britta, who's just had an article accepted for publication. She's a poet. She's an author. Her husband has written a novel, wonderful novel. We have Natasha, who's brilliant in so many different ways. We have Jayashree Radhe. We have Radhe Shyam, who translates Prabhupada's books from Kazakh into English. We have Rupa Manjari, our god sister. You probably know her. Ram Kishore, who is very active in Minneapolis. He goes on radio. He goes on Zoom. He's interested in establishing a brick and mortar temple there. Jayashree Radhe runs Radhika's store out of Florida. Sundari Priya is our own local pure devotee here. Rakesh from Salt Lake City. Prashant, who when I talk, he comes up with all the verses instantaneously, sometimes even before I come up. My Bobby's here. Jimmy, who works with Ram Kishore in Minnesota. Gene from Utah, also graphic artist. A lot of powerful people here, and I'm sure that Dibya Joshi's on board. And so I think that a lot of people would benefit. Gary Sund is also with us. Dayanidhi, you remember Dayanidhi Das Shukshma, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. So what I'd like to know from you is 50 years of presenting Hare Krishna dramas in temples and venues all over the world. You make a living as a professional storyteller, traveling to festivals all over the country and telling stories not only from the Vedic tradition, but from other traditions, also revealing, as you said, these universal truths. So you're like the acharya of verbal communication. What tips can you give us? How can you bless us with the fruit of what you've learned after 50 years of communicating through storytelling and drama? We're all ears here.
Well, you certainly put me on the spot. And I must thank all of the exalted personalities for joining us and hearing some of my experiences and hearing about my work. Thank you so very much for taking the time to participate in this. But the thing about my own journey is I was born in Germany. I came to America in 1952 at the age of 5. I was thrust into the public school system, not understanding a word of English. And for me, communication has been a lifelong theme. I was struggling to express myself and to communicate early on, arriving in America. And finally, when I was dabbling in writing and a little bit of speaking. But then when I got to college, I kind of grabbed the bull by the horn, so to speak, and I got involved in the theater project in college. And so one of the really important things about communicating and expressing ourselves, and this also, it has impacted my wife and I in our 50-year marriage together. I think people need to be able to communicate and have the channels open, the lines open of communication to work out, because there's no situation that is perfect. We're all going to find ourselves in different situations. A lot of problems spring up through miscommunication or a lack of communication. And so one of the things that I've encountered is that when we begin to express ourselves and share our stories, usually like, people, they want to learn how to express themselves and learn how to be creative. I've given a lot of different workshops, and they say, well, you're a creative person. I'm not creative, but actually we all are creative. We all have different talents and abilities that we can share. There's things that I can do that you can't do, and there's things that you can do that I can't do. So Krishna has allotted everyone with various strengths and various weaknesses. And so if we want to develop our communication skills, I think it's important to look, to learn. And this is what I've done a lot of programs in the elementary schools as a multicultural storyteller. And in the schools, the funny thing is that the kids are told to be quiet in a calm classroom. But actually, the earlier we can learn how to verbally express ourselves, the better it is for everyone, for our entire culture, because those communication skills or lack of communication skills are what's going to make our efforts successful or failure. And so this 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 journey of mine is all about communications. So I don't know if I've tapped on any one particular item.
I was sharing a story yesterday on my own case. My wife and I joined Krishna Conscious in Australia, and actually we hadn't. This story takes place before I joined, and it's because I joined. We were visiting the temple, working outside, visiting the temple. Been to India already, and didn't get much out of it, but saw an opportunity to learn Indian culture right there in Australia from the devotees. So we visited temple 2 or 3 times a week for a period of time. And Bali Martin, having started the temple in Australia with Upendra, went to Hong Kong. And then I was driving. I'd only been visiting the temple, and I was driving Upendra to the airport. He was going to go to Fiji to start a temple there. And I said, who's going to give the talks? Who's going to be the communicator after you leave? And he said, you are. And I wasn't even living in the temple. I was just a visitor. And he thrust that on me. And so it's kind of like Uncle Sam, Uncle Krishna, Uncle Prabhupada wants you. And Prabhupada said, you don't know how to be a soldier? Well, just put the uniform on. It'll tell you what to do. So I think what you're saying is, if the opportunity arises, seize it. If you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're an educator, encourage students to express themselves, to communicate. We had our first tour since COVID. We had our first school tour yesterday, about 70 second graders from American Preparatory Academy. This is our first formal school tour in almost a year and a half, and we're so happy.
Wonderful.
And I asked my wife, I said, do you want me to sit down with the kids and do a question and answer session? She says, well, they're second graders. I said, they ask the best questions. Mm-hmm. The seed of inquiry, of learning, of enthusiasm has not been spoiled. It's not been suppressed or discouraged at their age. And I find that the second graders are much more upfront and open about questions and ask better questions than the junior and senior high schools, who are all up about peer pressure. If I ask a question, what'll the cool kids think of me? And we had a wonderful question answer period, which went on for 45 minutes, and we only had to stop it because the teacher said they ran out of time. So I couldn't agree with you more. Let that spirit of communication, let that seed be watered from the very possible earliest age.
I think it's, like you realize that there's more, the kids are more open and dynamic when they're younger, and the educational system kind of squishes that curiosity and that vibrancy. And so I've done programs, of course, throughout the spectrum from elementary school up to college. And you're perfectly right. In the elementary schools, there's a lot more inquisitiveness and a lot more, interest. So I've done, like the story of Yudhisthira and the dog that I told at the beginning. I've done that for elementary school kids, and they love it. And
who couldn't love a story about a loyal dog? Britta from Ogden says she and her dog were sitting side by side listening to you hear that story, and she swears she saw her dog smile.
Getting back to the just the point about some of the points that I can offer. This is, I don't know if you can see that.
Yes, we see it.
This is my website, Mahabharat dash project.com. And if you go on there, I have tips for how to improve your storytelling skills, how to improve your writing skills. So, and then my Facebook page is under my legal name, Andy Frankel. And so if you'd like to check out my site, um, there's a lot of different information that's available. And also, I encourage you, if you like to read my book, Caru has it available at his store, I think.
Yep.
And I also have it available if you're not anywhere near Spanish Fork, then you're welcome to order it from my website.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I'm just gonna go do something really wild. It occurred to me you have the same name as Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl's philosophy as a prisoner in the concentration camp was don't take it personally. Don't let it be about you. He said, I saw my children, my wife, I saw my parents stripped naked and led off to the gas chambers. I saw that. But I also learned in the concentration camp, it's not about you. It's their problems. Hurt people hurt people. So I always tried to maintain unfailing politeness to and concern even for the guards who were killing us and oppressing us. And I think this is a point we can learn from the Frankls of the world. Don't let it be about you. It's not about you. If someone's oppressing you, if someone's discouraging you or criticizing you, it's because of their burdens, their problems, their misunderstandings. It's not about you. And the way that you can deal with that best is don't stop being considerate. Don't stop. Just because someone's planting weeds in your garden doesn't mean that you stop planting your own seeds. You plant enough good seeds, and in and of themselves, they'll push out the weeds. We celebrated Ram Navami last Wednesday, and we talked about Ram. What a betrayal! What a betrayal! Imagine if you expect a pat on the head. You kind of got your eyes closed, and you're anticipating the warm, cuddly feeling of someone patting you on the head, and instead you get a vicious slap across the cheek. How would you react to that? Most of us would be outraged. What a betrayal! Totally different than what we expected. And yet that same thing happened to Ram. He expected to be coronated, and instead he was cast out and sent to the forest for 14 years. He did not for a moment make it about him. He thought how he could advise Lakshman from not killing Kaikeyi, how he could console his father Dasarath to help him understand it wasn't his fault, how he could help his mother not to commit suicide, but to realize that her husband needed her now more than ever. He even went to he even talked in favor of Kaikeyi. Lakshman said that Kaikeyi's been like our mother all the lives. How could she do this? She's been like how could she do this? And Ram said, the fact that she's acted so inconsistently, the fact that this act is so different from the way she treats us means it must be fate. Don't blame her. It's her fault. So what Ram is doing is not having a pity party, not making it about him, not going boo-hoo, it's so unfair, but he's telling us that opposition is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to look to others, to continue to sow good seeds, to continue to be the best person that you can possibly be, even when those around you are acting less than optimally. And so is that a legacy that the Frankls of the world support and would like to pass down?
Thank you for that profound point that you're making, because we may not be able to change our circumstances or our situations. There's so many factors in the world that we're not in control of, but we are in control of our attitudes, and we are in control of how we can respond to the challenges of the world. And so this Viktor Frankl, his name is spelled without the E's. But if you're interested, the listeners, his book is Man's Search for Meaning. And so you might want to check that out. It's a very profound book. So how do we change our attitudes, and how do we get control? Yoga is all about learning how to control the mind, how to control, regulate the body, regulate our eating and sleeping habits, so many different habits that we have. So the basis of yoga is to regulate our lives. And the more advanced stages of yoga is to develop our love for the Lord in the heart. And that's Krishna. He's residing within our heart. He's on our journey with us. He's not going to abandon us.
And I think communicators, whether they're verbal or whether they're literary, communicators are poised to be a blessing to others. Communicators have a sacred duty because of the talent and ability that God gave them. They have a duty to sharpen that ability and to use it for the enrichment of the lives of others. The most desperately needed commodity, I think, today is hope. Hope that no matter how dark or divisive, no matter how bitter and resentful different groups of sectarian parties are against each other, that these are times when God is not out of control. God's not surprised by what's going on. God's still on his throne. He's still got us in the palm of his hands. And these times, these confusing times, just like the times of the Mahabharat, when the Pandavas were treated so unfairly, when the forces of darkness threatened, these are golden times for people of faith. Pass the test. Keep being good. Things may be unfair that are happening, but God is fair. I was reading recently that time favors satyagun. Time favors the mode of goodness. Time does not favor the mode of passion. Time does not favor the mode of ignorance. You can get ahead, you can get money in the bank, and get a big house by acting unethically and compromising your principles. But eventually all that will be taken away and given over into the hands of those who kept faith, who believed in the Lord, even during the darkest times. So everything will come out in the wash eventually. And if you stay in the mode of goodness, you keep being a person of excellence, a person of faith, and you keep communicating in whatever ways that you're gifted, communicating hope and expectancy and trust in the Lord, then the process of time, the very function of time itself, will mean that the last chapter of your story is a chapter of victory, just as it happened with the faithful, righteous Pandavas.
Thank you.
Do you want to wrap up Sankirtan? And then we're going to ask Rob also. Rob is on the call with us, and Rob always has a beautiful word to the wise at the end. So
okay.
Give us your concluding statements, and then we'll go to Rob.
Well, one thing about the relevancy of the Mahabharat today, you know, the Mahabharat is not only about spiritual knowledge, but it's also about practical knowledge and practical guidance on how to be in the world. And one of the things about the Mahabharat is that there's a definite understanding of leadership. What are the responsibilities of the leaders? The political leaders or the cultural leaders, or the leaders in industry, what is their responsibility? So Narada Muni, when now Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, he's established in his own kingdom with the Pandavas in Indraprastha, and Narada Muni comes to visit him just as their reign is taking off. And Narada Muni gives him not spiritual advice, but practical advice on how to manage and lead the kingdom. And the very first thing that he offers is that make sure the citizens are happy. That's the purpose of leadership. And so Narada Muni explains this happiness has to come out in two different ways. One way is that there has to be justice for everyone. And the other way is that there has to be economical opportunities for everyone. These are the way people define happiness, through their economy and through the way they're treated on in the legal or social levels. So there has to be justice, there has to be economic opportunity. And so that is very important. And that the leaders are responsible, and they have to, in one sense, make a sacrifice. They have to be the first ones to step up to the plate, to make a sacrifice. The leaders can't be in the Senate and they're going on and jabbering about this and that and the other. And if there's some economical hardships, they have to be the ones to make a sacrifice. People are losing their livelihoods. The leader should be the first one to say, I'm diminishing my own salaries. And this is exactly what happened years ago when there was some economic hardship in my daughter's company. The leader of the company asked everyone to take a temporary 10% cut in salary because of this is at the end of the Bush era when the economy dropped. And so not only did all the employees take a 10% cut, but the leader himself said, I'm not taking a salary at all. I'm giving up my salary until we get through this bump in the road. And so we have to really understand what it means to be a leader and hold the leaders accountable for the things that are going on. And this is one of the main teachings of the Mahabharata, besides the spiritual teachings, of course, but this is one of the main teachings about what it means to be a leader.
Excellent insights. I'm already thinking of our next show when I can ask you about your success stories, about instances when you feel you've really touched people, especially youth. But we're out of time today. Rob, do you have a word for us?
Thank you, Prabhuji. This was
You're breaking up a little bit. There's a bit of distortion there.
Interview, and I greatly appreciate it. And I really appreciate the analogy of the Mahabharata being comes and goes where I'm at. So hopefully, I appreciate the Mahabharata being for Vedic wisdom for dummies, because I think that's something I can probably qualify for. And it's wonderful to have such ease of access to such wonderful wisdom and guidance into the ways to live in this Kali Yuga age. And I look forward to looking at the abridged version. Thank you very much for that service. And also, not taking things personally is an incredibly powerful tool. It really changes the perspective on life when you don't take things personally. And I very much needed to be reminded of that.
Bless you, Rob. Thank you as always for your comments. The link to Sankirtan Das's page has already been put up on the comment section by Britta. And what about your personal page? Perhaps you could spell your name so that everyone can look you up on your personal page also.
Page is Andy Frankel. I use my legal name, ANDYFRAENKEL. And I have several sites, but my main site is mahabharat-project.com.
And we'd love you to come some year in September to the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival. Think that's a possibility at all?
You know, I have to admit, years ago, it must have been about 10 years ago, you were in New Vrindavan. And as you left, you asked me that please come out to Spanish Fork sometime soon. And I promised I would, and I've been remiss. And I still have that promise in my mind, and I still hope to fulfill it someday soon.
The Ashtons, the people who developed WordPerfect, I think, which has morphed into other companies, they started many years ago a storytelling festival in Utah Valley. It's at least been going on for 20 or 30 years, and they get storytellers from all over the world. So
I've heard of it.
yeah, we would love for you to, if you need any local sponsorship or a word on your behalf to get accepted, of course, we'll be here for you. We'd love to have you come to the Timpanogos, and while you're in the area, of course, we'll tap your experience and wisdom. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Our head at your feet, faithfully transmitting the message and the culture that Srila Prabhupada took so much trouble to come from India alone and unsupported to transplant to America, and you have taken the baton from your spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, and enriched the entirety of the Western culture with dramas, with literary output, and with storytelling. A true hero of faith in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Sankirtan Das. Everybody who's with us, let's acknowledge his contribution to a spiritual master in the world with Hari Bol 3 times. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you for your wonderful service at Spanish Fork. It's unbelievable.
We do it with the help of such wonderful people as you see joining us here on Facebook today.
I can imagine. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you next Monday for Motivational Monday. We also have programs on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. We have our Chant for Change series. And we also have Zoom call, the Salt Lake City Sangha, on Sundays at 11 o'clock. So you're welcome to join any of those or all of those. In the meantime, don't forget to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.